that out later. There we go. So now I'm recording things. So what were you saying? So there's a confusion of like the chat versus using the hashtag, and just like in the usage of people of how they go about collaborating. Is that the idea, or?
Well, some people don't understand that there is a difference between EdChat, the chat, and EdChat, the hashtag. Originally, we created the EdChat hashtag for the purpose of having a chat. So we could have this chat at a specific time, and the EdChat hashtag kept everyone connected. It was at a time when hashtags were just coming about. So, you know, we're going back 8 to 10 years, somewhere thereabouts.
Yeah.
And when we had the chat, people would use the hashtag, and that was it. But shortly after the chat was successful, after a couple of weeks, we started seeing the EdChat hashtag popping up on any tweet that had to do with education. So it got to be one of the leading hashtags to be used on Twitter. And it was fine for a while, but it got to a point where during the actual chat, which takes place for 1 hour, actually back then it was twice a day. It happened at noon and also 7 p.m. Eastern time.
Right. Yeah. Has the noon been dropped?
Yeah,
pretty much. Know that.
Yeah. Well, the reason why we dropped the noon is because we started the noon chat because people from Europe and Asia were either getting up early in the morning or staying up late at night to be involved in the chat. So they wanted a time, and we couldn't create a better time, so we just added an additional time. So we had actually 2 chats, and they were different topics each time. One was at noon for those people in Asia and in
Oh, you kind of
it's gotten to a point now where there are so many chats that the noon chat really wasn't necessary anymore to fill a need for people to be involved.
Yeah, so it was that if you wanted to talk education, you went to EdChat, and now there's all these niches, right? There's like tons of specific things that go in specific directions, right?
Yeah, there are very specific chats out there now. I mean, you know, there are first grade chat, second grade chat, third grade chat, and social studies chat. And,
no, it's never ending. Yeah, well, one of the things that you and I touched on a little bit in our podcast we did together, and then dived in deeper with Shane the last time, and hopefully we'll keep doing now, is just like the usefulness. No, usefulness is the wrong word, but like having actual dialogue and back and forth conversation rather than backpatting. So having seen a bunch of a whole host of people talking on EdChat, I mean, you've got a great wealth of experience in the types of conversations people are having. Like, has there been evolution on that? Are people getting better, or is it less dialogue than it used to be, or what are you noticing?
Well, there are 2 different types of chats now. I think we may have mentioned this last time. We still keep the same format as when we started. It's kind of like an open chat. We have one topic that we talk about, and we take a deep dive into it. And depending on who's involved, it could go off in many different directions. And sometimes people break off into their own chats as a result of that. You kind of have to go into EdChat with a strategy as to how you're going to handle it, because you know, you wouldn't walk into a football stadium and try and have a conversation with everybody in that stadium, and that's kind of what it's like. So the strategy that I always develop would be I would throw out questions, you know, additional questions pertaining to that subject, and whoever bit upon that, I would have my specific conversations with, and other people certainly were free to join once they saw that conversation developing. So, you know, I might go in one direction, and back in Stephen Anderson very heavily, so they may have taken strands off in their direction, but nevertheless, it was everything having to do with a specific topic. And it could be confusing. It is confusing to people who are just starting out and don't understand that you do need a strategy, that you can't follow every single tweet. Especially, back then we were doing something like 3,000 tweets in an hour. That's how fast that thing moved. What developed from that were chats that would start off with one topic, and then they would have a series of questions, maybe 10 questions in 1 hour that the moderators would put out. To me, I always thought that was I always viewed that as an administrator's chat, because they have certain goals in mind that they want to accomplish things with, and unless all 10 questions were answered, they weren't accomplishing their goal. Chat, you may not get to the specifics of what the original question was, but you'll get to a whole bunch of other stuff that has to do with it that could be vitally important to changing the overall topic, if that makes sense.
Well, it's way more conversational that way, right? Like, it's following a regular flow of a conversation where you're meeting the needs of the people you're talking to.
Yeah, exactly. You kind of have to listen to people's questions and listen to people's answers rather than just answering a series of questions. And there's a difference there. It makes it more of a conversation. And it's I always thought that the list of questions chats really didn't respect the audience. Didn't think the audience was intelligent enough to direct where they
their own questions
go. Yeah. So, but for some people, that format is helpful in that it is structured, and they don't have to think as much. They just answer the question, and it's for some people. Whereas the open format, again, requires you to listen to questions and listen to answers and respond to those within the chat itself. So those are the two formats, and that's how the one evolved into the other.
Right. Well, I think what you're saying, I mean, it's relatively simple, but it makes a lot of sense, is that you have a strategy. It's not just about the tool of Twitter, but how you go about using it. I've had so many people tell me that when they join an ed chat, it's just overwhelming, and they don't know where to go and how to get involved and what to do. And I love the analogy of talking to a whole football stadium, because that's what it feels like. But obviously there's no point. You got to find your niche, find your section.
Yeah.
Get a few people, see who hooks on, and have an actual conversation with them. And the beauty part is that you have there is a football stadium of people to choose from. And if your conversation is interesting enough, the right people will come in and latch on. I mean, it's a good strategy, a good way to avoid having to feel like you need to keep up.
It's easy to spot people who are adding value to that chat. And those are the people who you really want to follow. Whether or not you agree with them isn't important. Sometimes the challenge that people give you is more of a push that you need. So you just don't want to connect with people that you agree with. You want to connect with people who challenge you as well.
Right. And so that's an interesting skill too, is figuring out how to challenge. And that was where I was wondering about this, the kind of conversation that there tends to be a lot of, the picture with the nice saying and the oh yeah, that's a great idea comments, rather than people challenging each other. And the argument that I hear for that is that it's 140 characters. I can't possibly create a balanced argument in 140 characters. Thoughts?
Yeah, thoughts. Well, it certainly has improved my chatting skills being limited to 140 characters, because you really have to think about what it is you want to say and say it in 140 characters. But even though each tweet is limited to 140 characters, you're not so limited with the number of tweets that you can put out, and that's what makes a conversation. Somebody pointed out to me, yes, there are limits on the number of tweets, and I remember back.
Are there?
I think there are, and it's based on the number of followers you have and the number of follows and followers. There is a formula I think that Twitter uses, but I don't know if they still hold to that. But I've never been, I've never hit my limit on tweets. So my feeling is, yeah, you are limited to 140 characters per tweet, but you're not going to be limited in the number of tweets that you can put out. And sometimes it takes more than one tweet to kind of explain where you're going. But it does thinking moving faster, and it enables you to clear your thoughts a little bit more without all of that educational BS that so many people try to tag onto stuff. You know, if you leave the educational BS off, you can really get to your point a lot quicker.
Yeah, well, I often will do is I'll write my whole thought that I want to write, and then I'll see that it's like 200 characters too long, and then I'll start axing away at it. Okay, well, what in this concept do I not need to say? Like, I don't need to say whatever, this piece or that piece, and then I whittle it down to something.
Right.
And probably in the reality, it's a better, more clear thought, right? Because then I'm not rambling off about whatever. I have to actually putting thought into my comment to make it as clear and concise as possible. So one could even argue that just get better at it. If you get better at making your argument, then you'll be able to fit it into the 140 characters.
And you'll find that the more chats you get involved with, the more you develop that skill. You know, obviously, the more you use it, the more it's going to get better. So
do you, I feel like you actively do that. Do you actively, as a user, do you actively sort of try to push back on people just for the sake of pushing back, or yeah, that's your thing. So
that's what I do. Well, that's how EdChat got started, actually, because I was the one, you know, I would just be throwing questions out to get people to respond, to do that kind of thing. And both Shelley Terrell and Steven Anderson were often involved with those questions that I threw out. So Shelley was the one who said, why don't we try and do this on a more regular basis? And we did. We said, all right, let's just pick a time, and we'll pick a topic, and we'll go with that topic. And I think we had like 100 people for the first chat, and then it just got bigger and bigger after that. Thing that people wanted.
It was like a vacuum at the time, right? Because no one was doing it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, people were just understanding what Twitter was. You know, when I got on Twitter, most tweeters back then had a common history in that they would sign up for Twitter, they would get on Twitter for a little while, not understand what's going on, and then they would drop off for a couple of months until somebody explained it to them. Then they would get back on with an understanding as to what it was and how to use it. And that was a history that most of us had that was in common. So Twitter is not intuitive. It really isn't. You really need an explanation of what it is and how to use it. Yet it has become a very effective tool of collaboration for educators, because the kinds of things that we collaborate on would be, oh, you should read this article, or, oh, you should see this video, or here is a policy that we are now working with. And these are things that are often, or before Twitter, were shared by teachers. So once we get to Twitter now, they can share those things by just sending people a link to them. And it's what we do. It's in the wheelhouse of educators to share sources. So Twitter just makes it a lot easier.
Yeah, it makes the net bigger. Rather, people were good at sharing, but they're sharing within the building, sharing within their board, that sort of thing. But now, like the net is much bigger, right? You can share with a wider PLN, and then with using hashtags like this, which I love to encourage people to go to Twitter chats when they're first starting, because I can have conversations with people that wouldn't otherwise be in my PLN. Like I wouldn't know to follow you or Shelley until I go into a hashtag style chat, go into EdChat, and notice that, oh, this is someone that's saying something I like. I'm going to follow them.
Right.
And so it gives you it's like a primer.
Well, the other thing too is to follow.
Go ahead.
The other thing too is to follow, retweets, because there are thought leaders that we have that are retweeted all the time. So if you start to see somebody's name appearing in retweets more often than other people's names, you want to follow that person directly, so you don't have to depend on retweets to see what they have to say. And that's often been that's often been my secret weapon about Twitter. I felt that I would only tweet the best tweets that I would find, and I found out that if you retweet really smart people think that you're really smart as well. and that's been my
standing on the shoulders of giants, as it were.
That's it.
You're making me think a little bit about how to explain Twitter, because I've done like I use it a lot, right? Okay, so I like it. And so because I like it and I get a lot of value out of it, I try to let other people know about it. And I'm an administrator, so try to let my staff know about it. And I've done lots of lunch and learns and various other things to show them. And I've understood that the language of Twitter is different, I think, from the beginning. So I talk about hashtags, I talk about @ symbols, and like just the language, the hypertext language, try to get your head wrapped around that, how Twitter chats work and that sort of thing. But what I don't think I've ever sort of actually broken down is the deeper way of how to use it that you're sort of describing, of like what are, so you know how to use it, you know how to use hashtags, you know how to use @ symbols, but what's the deeper level than that? What kind of questions are you asking? How are you answering questions? You know, are you poking at somebody? I've seen this with you for sure, where like I don't think Tom thinks that, but he's poking at them to see if he can get the conversation going.
Well,
what strategies are you using? So that
you just have to be provocative. I think provocative doesn't mean that you have to be an idiot. In when you don't have to be combative. You can be provocative without being combative, and you can be respectful with everything that you do. You've always got to be respectful. You know, those people who stoop to name calling and stuff on Twitter, it's just not worth it, because people just turn it off and they don't listen. So you don't really accomplish anything that way. But and this is something we have to learn, the whole idea of being respectful. And it's something that kids have to be taught, because they're not going to get it any other way. That's kind of an aside. I don't know what was the original question.
No, I like that.
Being provocative.
I don't remember what was the original question. Is talking a bit about the sort of deeper strategies of Twitter. Like once you understand the nuts and bolts, like as a teacher, what are your goals? Why are you trying to use it? I'm thinking that those are the sorts of things, those sorts of tools I need to be giving to teachers, like or educators. I'm telling them about how to use Twitter and how beneficial it is, but I'm not necessarily talking about the strategies. How do you talk to a football stadium, for example?
Well, the whole idea of Twitter is collaboration, and that's the best form. You know, we talked about andragogy before, and the best form of learning for adults, and I think for kids as well, is through collaboration. And if you're an educator and you're in a building, you've got your department that you can collaborate with. So let's say you've got 9 people in your department. For me, I had let's say 11 people that were all English teachers with me, secondary English teachers, and if anybody wanted to do something about Shakespeare, they would have 10 people that they could turn to for ideas. My problem, though, was when I had ideas, I wanted to incorporate some kind of technology with it. And those 10 people were not helpful to me, because I was the one that they would come to for technology advice. So therefore, even though I had 10 people I could collaborate with, I couldn't collaborate with them all the time. I had no other place to go until the world was opened up to me through the internet and Twitter specifically, because now I can turn to literally thousands of people who I can connect with. They become my collegial sources who I can ask questions of, which gets me out beyond my building, beyond my district, beyond my city, beyond my state, beyond my country. I've got global access. When they've got the whole world at their hands.
Right. Yeah, no, it's just so much bigger. And if you can figure out how to navigate it, you can get those pieces that you couldn't otherwise get. I mean, it's economy of scale, kind of in a very clear way.
But even the kinds of people that you can now connect with is far different than ever in the history of education. I mean, how often could you come in contact with authors, unless they're brought in specifically to your district, or they appeared at a bookstore? Now, if you want, you can connect with education authors anytime you want, because many of the thought leaders and the authors about education, the people who are really pushing the ideas, many of them are connected on Twitter. So you can connect with them and have a one-on-one discussion with them, which was never before available to teachers. And it's the same thing with bloggers. I mean, blogging has become what we used to look to the journals, the educational journals that came out. People don't get them anymore because they're not being printed anymore. The whole print media is changing. So what we do is we go to those things that are published online at this point, and we go to blog posts of education thought leaders to get the latest idea of what's being vetted on the internet. They take their ideas, they put them out there so that people can respond to them, so they see where it is they want to take these ideas before they actually become used. And a prime example of that was,
you can curate that too.
Yeah.
Really personally, you can curate that of like, okay, I have these sort of 4 people that I think are really great thought leaders for me because they speak to my sort of interests. And then they point me in the directions, and then I can go over here rather than somebody else telling me who I should be going to, right? Like, I mean, if we're a heavy user on Twitter, we probably all have some similarities in who we follow and what blogs we read, but it won't be the same. Like my bent will be different than your bent, and allows me to sort of really personalize it.
Well, that also is my philosophy on retweeting certain things. For instance, if I see a teacher is putting out a question about something that I don't have a knowledge of or I'm not comfortable answering, I will retweet that tweet out so that other people can see it, because I've got close to 80,000 people who follow me. So if somebody who only has 15 followers puts out a question and it's only getting to those 15 people and they're not getting an answer, by me retweeting it, it goes out to 80,000 people who then could come up with an answer for the same person. So it's kind of like a service performed in a retweet. You're really supporting your collegial sources by passing along their requests to your own personal learning network so that those people can connect.
Right, you bring them into the fold. So, okay. So I'm thinking about this. So you got, so I'm trying to get a teacher on Twitter. So I get them on Twitter, and then I convince them to stay on and use it, and they start to use it. That's great. They go to Twitter chats, they get involved, blah, blah. And then, I mean, often is the case, people start out sort of lurking, right? Just watching.
Yeah.
And then they'll start out, and then they'll begin conversation. And what Shane and I were talking about on the podcast we did the other day was then it turns into a bit of a, or can turn into a bit of a cycle of just general, just agreeance, just like, this is a great idea, thank you. So break the cycle of fluff. And is it that people get stuck into that? In my opinion, and I'm curious what yours is, but my opinion is there's a fear about perception. And you mentioned being provocative without being combative. I think that people, when if they're going to put something out there that's like semi-controversial or is seen as provocative, they're worried that there's going to be negative connotations with that. They're going to be seen as a bully. They're going to be seen as someone who's pushing other people around or something like that. When I believe that you can, I like that sentence, you can absolutely be provocative without being combative. And how would you help somebody sort of go down that direction? So that, because I mean, they've all been in conversations where everyone agrees with each other and they're not very productive.
Yeah, well, that's where moderators in chats become very important. You really need some thoughtful people who listen and stroke egos. They need to challenge people. Challenging is part of what we need in order to advance our ideas. Because if you're not being challenged on your idea, it could develop with a whole bunch of flaws that people didn't question. So you're going to come up with a flawed product just because people didn't challenge you enough in your thinking and developing whatever idea it is. That's why I think blogging is so important after the chats, because you're able to really expand those ideas that appeared in the chat, but people couldn't really go in depth on them because of the limitations of Twitter. Twitter is great for coming up with ideas and for moving traffic toward ideas, but actually a deep explanation of the ideas has to appear in blogs, and we need more of that. So bloggers play a very important role in advancing ideas in education, I think.
Well, yeah, I feel like it can be the second layer. Like Twitter's it's a good starter. It gets the ideas flowing, gets the concepts happening, and then you can take the time with these ideas, let them rattle around, and create your blog or podcast.
Or podcast. I include podcasts, but when I refer to blogs, I include podcasts.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I agree, and I mean, I would just encourage people to work towards that. I think when I first started asking people to go into Twitter, I was just expecting them to dive in, and I now understand that there is that cycle. You got to get comfortable. You got to understand what's going on. But like, once you do start getting comfortable, I don't think you should be afraid of poking at these ideas and pushing back a bit and being respectful in it. People appreciate it. I mean, that's how you find. I think that's how you develop a following, and how you get people interested in what you're doing. If you're willing to sort of actually get a conversation going.
Yeah,
that is my opinion.
But we also have to model that too. Those people who are good at it have to do it in the open, and so that other people can see what it's like to be provocative without being combative. The more people we have doing that, the more it's going to be accepted.
Right, and I like the idea that you were pointing out of the role of the moderator, because I suspect, I mean, I've certainly been in chats where the role of the moderator was to set up 10 questions in advance and let it run.
Yeah, again, that's just crazy. When we run EdChat, there are typically 4 moderators on there. Just because one moderator can't do it all. You can't keep track of everything that's going on, because the moderators also get themselves involved in not just moderating, but also responding within the chat on the topic. So we found by having multiple moderators, generally, in our chat, we've got 4 moderators. It gives everybody a chance to think and respond responsibly, with time to do it. Some moderators will help cover other moderators. If they see that one of the moderators was trying to question them, one of the other moderators would jump in to take on some of the strain there.
Right, so that's sort of a team approach, and I mean, it makes sense. Something quite as big as EdChat, that you have a variety of people doing it. Otherwise, there's no way then the moderator is trying to talk to the whole stadium, and they don't have a chance to sort of get into each pocket, right? Yeah. It's a zone defense. All right, well, I mean, I told you that it was going to be 3 of us, but I don't know. I guess Shane got caught up. We'll have to pull him in some other time. But anything else we should chat about, Tom? I love that you're able to come on every once in a while and talk to me. I appreciate it.
Well, it's never a problem. Whenever you need me, just give me a call.
All right, thanks so much. Talk to you soon.
Okay, buddy.